Today we are pleased to have the Reverend Marie Sanchez, and she will be leading part of the service. She has been a religious professional for 24 years, beginning as the Director of Religious Exploration and then a Hospital and Hospice Chaplain. She received her Master's of Divinity from the Unitarian Universalist Seminary, Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, and has served as minister at 3 UU congregations, currently serving as the part-time minister of our partnered Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach. Our theme for June is prophetic imperative. And yes, I had to check and ponder that, what that means. I like a passage written by Allegra Goodman. Prophecy is a poetry of change, social, political, moral, and spiritual. And Eric Fromm stated, prophets believe the meaning of life is the struggle for justice in community. Basically, speak up, do something, be kind. Like many of you, I have protested for civil rights, women's rights, equal rights. You would think they would all be the same. LGBTQ rights, and against war and bigotry. My passion has been working for the abolishment of the death penalty. But the most personally impactful protest I participated in was several years ago in Villa Park at an anti-bigotry rally. I joined Jan Meslin, Jan Story, and several others from Tapestry, holding the Standing on the Side of Love banner. We were used in a positive way by officials as a kind of peaceful, calm barrier between two aggressive, very vociferous sides. I felt immersed in the message of inclusion, of living our Unitarian Universalist principles. Tapestry is involved in so many good works. The Friends of Orange County Detainees, our women's rights action groups, Race Matters, just to name a few. And Tapestry is committed to being a safe spiritual haven. Our sanctuary, our community, is a home where we strive to hold each other in respect and trust. It's no small thing. And to be our authentic selves. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation.
Ours is not a task of fixing the entire world all at once, not even out here, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our grasp. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do is to intervene in a stormy world, as Susan was telling us, to stand up and to show your soul. Soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flames, can build signal fires. It's been 7 years now since I was arrested and jailed in Phoenix, along with about 90 other people, including our then president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the Reverend Peter Morales, and the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, our new president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, on July 29th, 2010, about 7 years ago. All totaled, there were more than 24 Unitarian Universalists of those 90 people who were arrested and jailed that day. I knew about SB 1070, the racial profiling law that was to go into effect in Arizona, and I felt it in a very visceral way. I am Hispanic. I am the granddaughter of immigrants from Spain, Italy, and Lithuania. And I knew what it was like for my family to suffer prejudice and profiling, if only for our names. Sanchez, Fernandez, Miches, Blanco, lots of Joses, lots of Carmens, and some very impressive accents. In spring 2010, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, the minister of our Unitarian Universalist congregation in Phoenix, told us that local immigration organizations in Arizona had contacted her because they knew Unitarian Universalists had a long and strong history of social justice, of standing up for civil rights. She called upon UUs from all over the country to first march May 29th, 2010 in Arizona to protest. What an incredible event that was. 50,000 people from all over the United States and some from other countries marched through the streets of Phoenix for several miles in blistering heat. Women, men, and children singing, holding signs, chanting in English and Spanish together. Hundreds of them were Unitarian Universalists. Are any of you here? Were any of you there that day? I was very proud of being a UU that day. Soon after that, our Pacific Southwest District executive, then the Reverend Ken Brown, sent out an email asking if there were people in our Pacific Southwest District churches who would be willing to commit CD, civil disobedience, in Phoenix, Arizona, on the day that the Draconian Racial Profiling Act would go into effect. I want to say I felt like there was a cloud of witnesses watching over me with expectations about what I would do. But since my grandparents were atheists, they might have found that amusing. My dad would probably have told me I was crazy, don't do it. So I think in reality my yes was an automatic reply because I felt called. I felt called to do it. I was called because of my family history. I was called by the history of my faith tradition of Unitarian Universalism. I was called because my respected leaders had asked me. I was called because I was personally contacted. I was called because my conscience implored me to act. I had never been arrested before. I really had no idea what that might mean. I had certainly never been in jail, but I was soon to find out, and I have to say, my life has never been the same. Meanwhile, I began rereading our Unitarian forebearer, Henry David Thoreau, his work on nonviolent civil disobedience, written in the 1800s. I knew that Thoreau's writing had inspired Mahatma Gandhi in India, whose actions in turn had inspired the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the decision he made in the civil rights movement in the 1960s here in the United States. I listened to the words of my good friend, Peter Morales, when he spoke of the legalities of racism in our immigration system. He said, as a religious people who affirm human compassion, who advocate for human rights, who seek justice, we must never make the mistake of confusing a legal right with a moral right. The forced removal of Native Americans from their land onto reservations was legal. The importation and sale of human beings, African slaves, was legal. Later on in my lifetime, he said, we had laws across the South designed to prevent African American citizens from voting. That was legal. Apartheid was legal in South Africa. The confiscation of the property of the Jews at the beginning of the Nazi regime was legal. The Spanish Inquisition was legal. Crucifying Jesus was legal. Burning the Unitarian Universalist proto-Unitarian was legal. Michael Servetus, burned at the stake for his Unitarian theology. The fact that something is legal does not cut much ethical ice. The powerful have always used the legal system to suppress the powerless. I'm going to give you just the briefest description of my experience in Phoenix. We had taken hours of training the night before we were arrested, but nothing could prepare us for what happened. Linking arms, we walked in a solid square of human beings into an intersection where we were met with police in riot gear, wearing face shields, with their guns and their tear gas canisters at the ready. The scene was like something from a movie. Literally, many dozens of supporters massed down the boulevard, and dozens of Phoenix police surrounded us, asking us to move. We would not comply. In fact, we were not using or carrying any identification at all. The only things we had in our pockets were cards that said, "We will not comply." Bullhorns and drums, people shouting, a circle of us holding hands around a giant banner. We were later told that the heat back to us from the street was 140 degrees. The police moved in, telling us that we would be arrested. We were handcuffed. We were placed in vans, where a woman showed me how to get out of my handcuffs. And we were taken to the Maricopa Sheriff's Jail, home of the infamous then Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The reason I changed my shoes this morning and my clothes is that I'm wearing these real sensible shoes. They're very comfortable. They're the shoes that I wore that day. I was told, don't wear your best shoes. And I thought, why would I want to wear high heels? I don't even wear high heels anymore. And they said, no, just don't wear shoes with any kind of artificial ingredients because they will melt and your feet will get third-degree burns. So we have a photo. There it is. Yes, I am being arrested by a very nice young officer. When we arrived at the jail, we were taken out of the vans. Then we were immediately placed back in the vans in the belly of the beast, which is the area underneath the Phoenix Sheriff's Station, as our Unitarian Universalist President Peter Morales, and we'll look at the next scene as image, and Susan Frederick Gray, there she is, my hero, minister then, still, of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Phoenix, along with Puente and other Unitarian Universalist ministers, moved in, and they blocked the jail entrance, as you can see. Inside the belly of the beast, now trying to put my handcuffs back on so that they don't see that I have my handcuffs off, we watched in horror as the sheriffs prepared their riot gear, shields at the ready, tear gas at the ready, guns drawn, scrambling to counter our protesters, unarmed and already being secured. Everything broke loose. It was angry. It was crazy. There was chaos. The sheriff's department felt overwhelmed with all of their arms because the drums were beating and the people were yelling. And I was putting my handcuffs back on. The jail experience was horrendous. We occupied very cold cinder block cells. The lights were on for 24 hours a day. The clock was broken. We were moved from cell to disorient us. We were watched by men and women guards constantly, using an open-to-view toilet in the middle of the room. The only 2 phones on the wall worked intermittently. There were not enough cinder blocks for us even to sit down, much lay down, on the cold, hard floor. Most of us were too exhausted to sleep. The only food we were given were bags of hard bread, sugary peanut butter, sugary drinks, sugary cookies, and frozen oranges. They were thrown at us twice a day in plastic bags, and get out of the way if your head was in the sight. We were constantly joined by women. The women and the men had been separated into different cells. Most of the women were prostitutes. Others probably for possession of drugs. Others were there for simple traffic violations. Almost all of them were persons of color. Some recognized us from the television coverage that morning. Some had been in their motels with their Johns, and they had seen the standing on the side of love shirts. They called us the love people. We kept each other's spirits up by teaching each other songs in Spanish and in English, Unitarian Universalist hymns, an indigenous song chant about the goddess Tonantzin, that one does this with their heart and just sings simply, Tonantzin, Tonantzin. She's the precursor to the Guadalupe, the Virgin Guadalupe in Mexico. We did yoga. We did hokey pokey. Do you know what hokey pokey is in the Unitarian Universalist style? You know, you put your arm in, you put your arm out, you put your hip in, you put your arm, put your hip out. Well, at the end of Unitarian Universalist hokey pokey, you throw yourself in, but you never step out. All that time, we were aware that we were being videotaped on closed-circuit camera. As we waited for what we knew not, we were herded into a courtroom. It was the middle of the night, something like 3 o'clock in the morning. We weren't really sure. We were exhausted. We were dirty. We were disheveled. We were disoriented. We saw the men for the first time in their pink striped pajamas. Even though none of us in that jail cell had been charged with a crime. We could hardly speak, much less be coherent, or at least look the bit civilized. I can hardly recognize my photos from the court, which Ken Brown took surreptitiously. He was not supposed to do that. With only a moment or two with our lawyers, we were led before a judge. We were charged and released, some after 24 hours. I had heard stories of what it was like to be in jail. I had read about the treatment of prisoners in Joe Arpaio's jails. Now, aside from the experience of my only 30 hours in a holding cell, I thought what it would be like to be incarcerated for years, maybe life. I was also made very aware of my white privilege. When it came time for me to be booked, the white clerk looked at me, saw an older white woman with her clergy collar, and he apologized, and he asked if I wanted a drink of water. He told me his name so I could tell it to the guards if I were treated badly. Meanwhile, I watched my friends and my neighbors of color being pushed, shoved, called filthy names, receiving threatening looks and gestures from the guards of all colors, both men and women. I could only imagine how much worse it had been if there hadn't been all of our ears and our eyes of the more privileged there present. I saw quite painfully how personal and institutional racism dehumanizes every one of us in the system, including the guards, who are duped into thinking they are better than the people in the cells. It's a nightmare I will never, ever have released from my sleep, even in my dreams, because I know it's not about them. I'm part of the system. Can we see Peter and Jan now? Well, there they were, waiting for me. I was the last person released from jail. They had come to fingerprint me 3 times during that period of time I was in there, saying that they couldn't remember who I was. They also took away my collar. And when I went back the last time, the young prostitutes looked at me and said, "What's different about you? Wait a minute, where's your collar?" And I told them they had taken it away, assuming that they did not want anybody in the news to see a minister having been arrested or jailed. These young women, went over to the toilet paper and made a collar for me and put it back on. So when I was released, that's a toilet paper collar made by prostitutes in the jail. the sheriff's station. Will I go back to jail? To be honest, no. I've done my time. I was the oldest woman to be arrested that day, and now I'm 7 years older. But I'm still called. There are many ways I can work for justice. Perhaps you are called too. Since that time, I've been thinking a lot about calling and about activism. I have preached this sermon, an arresting development now, for the past 7 years. I'm preaching it 3 times this summer, and once again this fall in different Unitarian Universalist congregations, thinking each time, well, this will be the last because this is old news. It's not old news. Maybe Joe Arpaio isn't the sheriff in Arizona anymore, but this is what's going on all over the country. This is nothing compared to what is going on all over the country. After this election in particular, I know our stories all need to be told, because all of us are fearing the gathering darkness. E.B. White wrote, "If the world were merely seductive, that would be easy. If the world were merely challenging, that'd be no problem. But I wake each morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it very hard to plan a day." I am an activist, and I'm very aware that many of you are activists too. Perhaps all of you are activists. You see, Unitarian Universalism is not an orthodox religion, because orthodoxy means right belief. Orthodox religions are creedal religions with doctrines and dogmas, expecting their adherents to not only believe alike, but to think alike too. Unitarian Universalism, on the other hand, is an inclusive faith which embraces many beliefs. Among the sources of our faith we affirm and promote is the wisdom of all the world's religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Unitarian Universalists are grounded in orthopraxy. We are all about praxis or practice, doing, acting, action, activism. Another of our sources calls us to respond to the words and deeds of prophetic men and women which challenge us to confront the powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Unitarian Universalism, rather than being a religion of creed, is a religion of covenant. We make loving, caring promises to each other, to have respect for ourselves and others, believing in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, not some people, all people, realizing that we are a part of an independent web of existence. Unitarian Universalist orthopraxy may include such actions as meditating, praying, or reflecting together as we did this morning, singing in the choir, volunteering on committees, serving on the board of trustees, contributing to a potluck, serving as a worship associate, and attending services. So all of us here are activists in some way or another. Then there is another level of activism in the broader community in which I know many people in this congregation are very involved. Some of you write letters to your elected officials about things which matter to you. You email, you Facebook, you take part in community organizations, you work for the health of our planet, you bear witness in many ways. Perhaps in the coming days and weeks, you might join vigils or protests of some kind. I could not have done what I did without all of you, UUs. It takes not only a village to raise a child, it takes a whole community to stand with you, to love you, to support you, and to watch your back, as the saying goes, as an activist. It also takes a lot of healthy self-care and some intentional spiritual practice to sustain us on our life journeys. And that is where you, my friends, come in. For we Unitarian Universalists do what we do together. When we are frightened, we hold hands along the way. We gain our courage. We take heart. When we are supported by and acting in our convictions together, by my lights, we are going to need each other more than ever in the gathering darkness in the coming days. I found an article in Yes magazine. I don't know if any of you read that online. I see a nod back there. It's a wonderful progressive magazine. I highly recommend it. The article was written by Colin Beavan, reflecting how I feel about what happened to me. He said there are a lot of people who know way more about activism and citizen engagement than me. I'm pretty ordinary. Frankly, I don't even always want to be a part of service. But now I've learned how to be an ordinary person filled with doubt, who takes the risk of trying to do something about the world. He adds that what if the many hours we spend reading and complaining on the internet were spent coming together with people, coming together, holding hands to make a real difference. In 2012, I was invited to give the prayer of benediction to the General Assembly's Saturday night worship service to over 4,000 people. And there I am. It followed the testimonies of 4 Mexican-American immigrant activists telling their incredible, compelling personal stories. It was immediately before thousands of us went to Arpaio's tent city to protest horrendous conditions there. In my prayer, I said, "Will you pray with me?" And to see 4,000 Unitarian Universalists bow their heads in prayer is a pretty amazing sight. Spirit of love, Spirit of light, God of our beating hearts, together as one. As each of us breathes in and breathes out, let us offer our deep gratitude for these amazing days, which we have spent together in worship and witnessing, singing and dancing, learning and doing. Our lives have been changed forever. Challenged as we have been, tired as we sometimes have been, overwhelmed by all we have seen and heard and experienced, we know that many of our experiences here were in the safe and cool environment of this convention center, in restaurants and hotels. But not so for all of us here. Not so for our friends, our neighbors, who suffer every day in fear for the safety of their lives and that of their children and their families. Not so for those confined in detention centers and jails and across this nation in unfair, unacceptable, and inhumane conditions. We have the opportunity this evening, I said to the 4,000 in prayer, to stand on the side of love together with those who need to hear and see our love and support. We have the opportunity to witness to the world from our convictions as Unitarian Universalists, as people of all faith, in solidarity together, who seek justice and mercy and peace for all people. Let us take this opportunity and be glad for it. May we be blessed and a blessing as we go forth together. And because I said amen y amen, underneath what I was saying, it said, speaking in Spanish, blessed be. You can. We can. Sí se puede. Together, I'm absolutely positive. And my friends, I can assure you that I tend to be a very positive person. But as Beavan, the columnist in Yes magazine, reminds us, during these really hard times, anxiety will arrive, and depression will wash over us. You might find yourself running on fumes, and this should only remind us before this happens to take extra special care and engage in our favorite spiritual practices. Come to church regularly. You did today. You even walked across the barriers. And breathe. If we cannot do this together, if we cannot breathe here and now, who will and where? As always, there is strength in numbers. That's just the reality of it. If we are able to partner, as we did in Phoenix, with other justice organizations and with other Unitarian Universalist congregations, to quote a recent politician, we are stronger together. You may be familiar with the quote, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." This quote is one of several quotes which was emblazoned on the carpet in the Oval Room in the White House, President Obama's office. Who was he quoting? Martin Luther King Jr. Who was Martin Luther King quoting? No other than our 19th century Unitarian forebearer, abolitionist and minister, the Reverend Theodore Parker. Parker, who attracted several hundred people to hear his Sunday sermons every Sunday, knew that the ark does not bend by itself. The ark depends on us to do it. Unitarian Universalism is not a religion grounded in orthodoxy or right belief, but in orthopraxy, which is about right action. It matters not so much what we believe, but how we act on our beliefs. You see, we're all activists every day. We Unitarian Universalists live our faith. Ours is a faith not of creeds, but of deeds. My friends, I ask of you, what is it for us to do? It is for us. It is for us to heal the world. Amen y amén, speaking in Spanish, and blessed be.